Welcome to the Story Engine podcast, where we teach you how to make marketing easier, more powerful, and fun through storytelling. I'm your host, Kyle Gray. Each week we learn from top entrepreneurs, influencers, and world changers on how to share your story through content, copywriting, and speaking, and how to make your message your most powerful marketing tool. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Story Engine podcast. My name is Kyle Gray and we have a really special podcast today. We're doing a video podcast and we even have a live audience. We've got an amazing guest with us today, Dallas Hartwig. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, Dallas, you to introduce yourself properly is really difficult because you've done a lot of different things. You have many different interests and many different skills. How do you introduce yourself these days? How do you present the full picture of Dallas Hartwig?
Is this the hardest question of the whole thing? Because that is a hard question.
I think so, yeah.
I'm an explorer. I'm a guy who is interested in figuring out how to live well in a really weird and messed up world. And so I kind of take my experiences and thoughts and research and occasionally insights and share that with people in a variety of different ways. Sometimes books, podcasts, interviews like this, rambling Instagram posts. But my background is anatomy and physiology, and I'm kind of a science research guy, but then quickly lose interest in the really, really granular stuff when it's hard to connect to the real world. And so I'm a pragmatist in that sense too. I'm like, let's look at the research. Let's make this make good sense from a solid, rational standpoint. But then let's quickly drag it over into the real world and figure out how do we apply this. So I'm a pragmatic scientific explorer.
And will you tell me a story about a moment in your life that has really defined this path for you? How you've discovered these talents and these perspectives, and maybe that set you on this journey?
This is not, the questions are getting harder, actually.
Uh-oh.
No, I think that one of the experiences for me that sort of has defined that aspect of this part of my professional life certainly was the kind of accidental experience of co-founding the Whole30 program. And I say kind of accidental in the sense that what really happened was my former partner and I did some personal experimentation on ourselves back in 2008, 2009, and started tinkering with different dietary approaches and to see how we felt, how it affected mood, sleep, athletic performance, etc. And it was trial and error. It was tinkering. It was playing around with stuff. And then it became playing around with stuff in the public eye, and then it became playing around with stuff and tweaking the program and watching the results. And it was fairly sort of soft science. It was fairly sort of subjective and observational, but it very quickly iterated into something that became a really powerful tool for people. And so that idea or that approach of having an idea that something might be powerful and then just trying it out. And I mean, the Whole30 program is about food, but ultimately it's a metaphor for living more broadly, in the way that take something that sounds like it might be useful. Take something that, if you're not sure what's going on with life and things don't feel quite right, you have to change something. And I'm a big fan of Occam's razor. So if you don't know what it is that doesn't feel right, or you don't know what the cause of your problem is, guess. Guess at the thing that looks proximate and reasonable and tinker with it. And often the thing that you have that like gut sense is the root of the thing, often is.
So let's talk about food, and specifically my favorite food, which when I hear your name, this phrase pops into my head, and it's "don't chew your chocolate," which is something, this is something a mutual friend of ours mentioned about you right away, and there's such a cool and profound lesson behind this. Can you tell me about why people should not chew their chocolate?
It's so funny that you mentioned that. Something that was the first exchange that I had with this friend of ours, probably about a decade ago, and the question, the kind of the comment, the discussion was around how much chocolate can you have, and the context was, making nutrition recommendations to people, and people being like, well, how much do I do of this? How do I know how many calories, how many grams, how many servings, how much? And chocolate's one of those things where I think it's neither good nor bad. I think it's a food like anything else that has implications and so it's not a function of like good or bad, it's a function of like what are the natural consequences here. So the natural consequences are also proportionate to how much you eat. And so the question was, well, how much can I have? And I was like, well, and it was sort of an offhand remark, but it was something that later kind of stuck with me and stuck with you apparently. But the answer to the like how much can you have is you can have as much as you want as long as you never chew it. And the thought process there was twofold. One, just pragmatically, it's hard to overeat chocolate when you have to let it melt in your mouth. It goes slow, right? Especially if you've got like a really good quality, rich, dark chocolate, it melts slowly. And the intensity of the experience and the richness of the flavors that open up as you let it melt in your mouth are really rich and satiating, and often include the natural built-in sort of checks and balances to overconsumption. So there's the obvious piece of it's hard to overconsume chocolate when you have to let it melt in your mouth. But then there's the kind of, and I think what you're kind of getting at here is the larger piece of to what extent does the experience of, in this case, eating, influence, and how much should that guide the way you live in general? And so the other layer to that then is letting the experience regulate itself, letting the natural biological, psychological experience become its own experience and become its own way to navigate. How do I live in this world? Well, I pay attention and I let the built-in mechanisms speak for themselves, but I really have to listen. And whether it's talking about satiation with food, or it's talking about when you need, how much sleep you need to get, but like really tuning into being like, what does my body need? What feels deeply good and rich for me? And sometimes you don't know that till you really slow down and pay attention.
I like this, and there's a connection right here between kind of chocolate and sugar and consumption with food, but there's also it mirrors a lot of what you talk about. You have a program and a training called More Social, Less Media, mm-hmm. where I feel like social media, like chocolate and our phones and our devices and the internet age, it's brain sugar, and it can be really addictive and just hook us in. And we can, like you say, just eat a whole bar of social media chocolate without even thinking about mm-hmm. it. Or what would the don't chew your chocolate approach to technology and many of the fun bells and whistles that we're all engaged with these days look like?
That's a super good question. Like, what's the built-in check and balance? I think that the comparison there is really, really good. The social media candy bar kind of thing, because really what's happening is we have something that is justifiable, either as it's social engagement, or it's building my business, or it's entertainment, or it's there's lots of reasons we can give to other people, and especially ourselves, why social media or chocolate or any other thing, any other experience is totally okay. And I think the important part is removing the morality aspect of it, the self-judgment, the right, wrong, good, bad piece of it, because there's nothing morally good or bad about eating chocolate, and there's nothing morally good or bad about using social media. But I think what happens is that the way these products and services are often designed is they're often designed sometimes explicitly to obscure the natural effects from ourselves. Or, if that's not the case, we are more than willing to turn a blind eye to the natural effects on ourselves because we like how it feels. So we build in opportunities to use or consume the thing more often than is probably helpful for us. So I think, to me, it's difficult, and of course one of the things with the, you have to let the chocolate dissolve in your mouth piece is it slows you way down. You can't do it mindlessly. It's effectively a mindfulness exercise. So in slowing down and paying attention, what you can notice is like, oh, I've had 2 squares of dark chocolate. I don't actually want more. I don't want more. And you can just literally ask, like, do I want more? And you're like, oh, actually, I don't. And it's an easy answer. It's an easy solution. And I think there's probably something similar there with social media consumption as well. And the question might be there, does this still feel good for me? Good, capital G, settling, meaningful, does this enrich my life? But you have to slow down to be able to ask and answer that question.
I think one of the big things behind it is with a new social media, new technology, it kind of gives us like a very simple, usually it's like there's something that gets us in and gets us hooked, and I want to stay in touch with my friends in the different countries or from college. But the reason that we usually sign up for these things isn't always the reason that we stay scrolling. And I think that's what you mean by the natural effects of what happens here. And so one of the things I've been considering and working on is really getting clear, even writing down what is the purpose for me for using this tool.
Right.
It doesn't have to just be social media, but once you're clear on how you use those or the real benefit that it derives to you, then it's easier to kind of set the boundaries.
Yeah, I think to your point about the real benefit, I think the deeper the hooks are set, the harder it is to see the real benefit. I think that what happens is we start to create compelling stories, compelling narratives for ourselves about the real benefits. Because when I really drill down on it, when I think about Facebook, and I'll just use it as an example, the real benefit, the tangible benefit, either to me personally or to me professionally, is negligible. But I could pretty easily make a compelling story, but like I have to build my brand, and I have to have visibility, and I have to put out new content to get new followers, to sell more books, or whatever the outcome is. But the real tangible benefit is a lot harder to identify as a real thing when I'm more interested in whether it's a real thing or whether I'm just going to justify it myself. And that comes down to, that's just the being honest with yourself. And that's a difficult thing to do when you have an inherent reward system present, whether it is the reward system for digital stimulation or for sugar or for sex or for any other highly rewarding thing in the world. When you have that reward system present, it's difficult to see the real truth there.
Is there a way to break those cycles, or is that individual to each of those, or do you have some favorite strategies to kind of snap yourself out of those patterns?
I think there's a lot of commonalities between behaviors. I think there are specific strategies, but I think there's a lot of commonality, and I think ultimately, and I'll drop the word addiction in here because that's a word that I think does truly apply in a lot of these cases. And I use that loosely in the sense of sort of continued use despite harm, not in a psychiatric sense, but in a more broad sense. Because ultimately, when we are able to sit quietly and introspect and slow down, what we notice is that every time I get on Instagram, I end up feeling bad about myself because I'm comparing my life to somebody else's life. And actually, it doesn't actually feel good for me, right? It's not actually of a lot of net benefit, but I still do it. And so there is that continued use despite harm to myself aspect of it. And I think ultimately recognizing that is the very first step. Like any 12-step kind of approach is like, hey, I have a problem. This doesn't work well for me. And I think change happens when the fear of the change is, or I'll say it the other way, when the pain of it remaining the same exceeds the fear of the change. And that's kind of been the impetus for so many changes in my own life of, this thing's not working for me. It has to be different. And at this point, my greatest fear is having my future be like my past. And I think that's on a smaller scale, the way that all things change, including things that are really difficult to change, things that have inherent reward pathways built into them, and things that are truly addictive by anyone's definition. But it has to hurt before you're going to change it.
I can see that. And it's one thing to be able to be self-aware. We've gone through life, we've had some experiences, and we can kind of see, oh, there's maybe a problem here. But I think you also have a son that you are working on creating the best life possible for him. And when you are trying to work with somebody on the same level and maybe protect them or guide them and help them navigate this world where kind of the food we eat and the norms around the food we eat aren't exactly set up for their success,
Right.
and the technology around us is not set up in their best interest either. And then there's also culture and other kids and other parents. How do you navigate these systems, and how do you prepare your son and teach them to show them here's how you can find your way through this world?
Well, that's a big question too. The short answer is I don't know. You know, my boy's 6. He and I have about the same levels of cognition, so we identify easily with each other. We're both finding our way through the same world at the same level. But a lot of it has to do with helping him develop a very clear sense of self, so he knows who he is and what matters to him. You know, he's a 6-year-old boy, and right now his favorite color is pink, and he likes unicorns and nail polish and pink shoes, and some of his peers are really unkind to him about that. And so we're having lots of good conversations about what it means, girl things, boy things, who you are, how you respond when people are unkind. And that's a current example, but there's going to be, there has been and there will be many, many more experiences in his life, like all of ours, where we have to figure out who are we, what matters to us, and when that comes into conflict with dominant culture, with the norms, how do we handle that? Do we fall into line because there's enormous social pressure, consumer pressure, financial pressure to shut up and do as you're told? I mean, I think that this is kind of my social cynic coming out, but the conventional education system does a really good job of training industrial factory workers, but that's not where most jobs are these days and going into the future, as best as I can tell. And B, it doesn't actually make people's lives richer and deeper and more meaningful. It might prepare you for a financially stable job in a cubicle, but it's not something that's going to give you the most complete, most meaningful set of tools to go out and explore the world and find out what is my actual meaning and purpose myself, for me. So the conversations with my boy are a lot around, what do you think about that piece? What do you think about that art thing you just did? Like, I happen to like it, but like the important thing is like, do you like it? You made it, how do you feel about it? And having him check back in, and I had this sort of like moment of like parental pride the other day where we had a conversation and he didn't like my answer to one of his questions. He wanted to do something and I said, no, we couldn't do that. And he started to get frustrated and angry with me, and he's figuring out the balance of expressing anger without sort of acting it out. And he was like, give me just a minute. He like turned around in his chair and like took a few breaths and calmed himself down. I was like, yeah, like I'm doing something right here. I got a 6-year-old who's like, give me a minute to take some breaths. But that's the kind of stuff, and being able to separate self from everything else, and to have a sense of, not that like I'm so important or I'm so confident that what I think is the most important thing and screw the rest of you, but more that as he learns and as I learn at 40, that I need to know what's important to me and to recognize that there's absolutely no way to live a meaningful, happy, if that's the word, gratifying, satisfying life if you are conforming to somebody else's standard, no matter who that other person is. And we do a really bad job in this society of teaching kids how to figure out what that is for them, which is why I'm doing at 40 what he's doing at 6.
That's awesome. So you mentioned the education system here. So let's do a thought experiment and imagine we've just started the University of Dallas. What are some of the classes on the curriculum?
Oh, interesting. This is a great one. It's funny because I just talked about education with a friend a couple days ago, and I think the way I concluded that conversation was this whole, large, standardized education systems doesn't work, but like, I'm totally overwhelmed. I don't know how I would build something that would be more, customizable for each individual. So I don't really know. I think a lot of it has to do with self-exploration, and in order to, and you go all the way back to kind of attachment theory and the development of infants and toddlers, we have to feel accepted for who we really are as babies and infants and young children, to be able to develop the ability and the confidence to be able to go explore new things. And so this is informing the way that I parent my boy and I parent myself, because in order to go explore and figure out what do I like in the world, what am I good at, what fills me up, I have to have the sense of confidence that that's okay to do, and I have unconditional acceptance and love from, in my childhood, parents, and then later from partners and peers and friends, and from self. And so there's kind of this like closed loop of, if you don't get that in childhood, you have to develop it later, and it's really difficult to give that to yourself later if you didn't get it in childhood. So there's a lot of like extended personal growth there that then sets the stage to be able to go explore the world. So courses would be very self-directed. Courses would be very exploratory. Courses would, there's a balance, right? There's a balance of, you have to do some things just to try new stuff that you didn't think you would like or didn't think that you'd be good at. But then also there's the part of, I don't know what's right for you. I don't know what electives you should take. Go figure it out for yourself, So I think there's a lot of the kind of conventional general courses and electives that we take in university have some utility to give us some context for the world that we live in. And also, they don't really do the thing of teaching us how to think like they say they're supposed to. So have you heard or seen the David Foster Wallace? He gives a lecture many years ago, and he talks, and I think you can find that on YouTube if you search for David Foster Wallace, "This is Water." It's a brilliant commencement address. I think at I want to say Bates College or somewhere, but or Kenyon College, and he talks about finding our way through a very confusing world, and the whole, like, we're going to teach you how to think in a formal education system is well-intentioned but really, really oversimplified.
Okay.
That was my way of not answering your question.
It was a good way. It worked. It worked. I'm still ready to enroll. This one, maybe this can be one of the courses that I would sign up for. Actually, I'm asking for a friend on this one. But you've talked about success versus satisfaction, and this is something that I wanted to ask you about, because I found myself at many points in my life, I would set a goal. I'll make this income, I'll achieve this, I'll travel here, and I'll get focused and start doing it. And it takes time to achieve a goal.
Yeah.
But as somebody who's ambitious and always forward thinking, by the time I actually get to the finish line of the goal, I have 3 more other goals that I'm looking for that are off in the horizon again. And I don't have time to celebrate this one anymore because there's 3 more and the clock's ticking.
Totally.
So it's a path to success in some forms where there's motivation, there's always an impetus to go forward, but it's hard to really be present and enjoy life if you're always in that. How do you handle that balance as somebody who's seen lots of different success in many different ways?
Yeah, I definitely handle that situation differently than I used to, for sure. I think that success versus satisfaction is an interesting thing, because there is tremendous satisfaction in succeeding at your own self-created, self-assigned goals. And also, often, usually because of either misunderstandings about ourselves or misunderstandings about what we really, truly, deeply value, or because we take on many sort of culturally and societally assigned goals, we think applying ourselves to achieving the things will make us feel satisfied, will give us a sense of satisfaction. And many, many, many times, I and many of my peers do the thing, whatever the thing is, and get to the end and we're like, wow, that was kind of cool. I did the thing, didn't feel quite how I thought it would, or I'm on to the next thing already. And I think this, you hear the kind of the commonly quoted research on people's top 5 regrets, when they're on their deathbed, and none of them have to do with achieving more things. That's all about relationships and the way they spent their time and the way they valued people and the way they were vulnerable and intimate and connected to people that they cared about. None of it had to do with achieving more goals or having more success on any kind of professional, academic, financial way. Like, that's just not what people think about. And if you think about the sense of satisfaction, that's something that is a thing that takes a long time to develop. And it's kind of a slippery thing, and defined differently for each person. But I don't know too many people who are deeply, completely satisfied by solely professional, academic, financial success. So then it becomes a function of, okay, what is this a symbol for? What is this a placeholder for in my life? Why does it matter if I get the promotion or make partner or make $10 million? Or why does that matter to me? And I think understanding what that means, because I think there's nothing inherently wrong with doing those things, and they can be really deeply satisfying if they meet the need that you set out to meet with them. And I think lots of times that we don't even know what we're setting out to achieve in that deeper sort of sense of self way. So for me, and this is an uncomfortable admission, but I don't have professional goals right now. I mean, I have pragmatic goals of I have to get my 3rd book done because I'm already way behind schedule. But in terms of what do I do next, I actually don't know. And that's an uncomfortable place to be because I have financial commitments. I have people asking me. I have people being like, what's next? Where do you go from here? My agent's like, okay, cool. What? And I'm like, I don't know. But there is a certain type of satisfaction in having the free, clear, open headspace to be able to explore some of those things without having 3 more goals already set for myself. And that's not criticism of you. That's just, I'm in a different place.
Fair enough.
So I have found the fewer specific goals I set, the more satisfied I am. Which does not mean that's the same for anybody. That's the way it is for anybody else. Because for me, and again, I'm a sort of very kind of flowy, things change a lot over time. To your point, I've done lots of different things over the years. The more specific I am about my goals, the more myopic I get about achieving them. And you can use the analogy of playing football and advancing the ball down upon down and making touchdown or not. But at the end of the day, what do you you move the goal line. You make another first down. I don't know much about football. I'm from Canada. I don't do this stuff. I think that's how it works. But then, okay, cool. So you made a first down or you made a touchdown, and then you just do it all over again. And then the game's over eventually, and you're like, okay, cool. I had 6 or 60 or 6,000 successes. Who cares? Mm-hmm. I don't think in those win-lose terms. So I think ultimately it comes down to, again, knowing what matters to you, and if making the most touchdowns in your life is actually what matters most to you, do it. Get a sense of satisfaction from that. That's just not my process.
So as we kind of follow this path that you're illustrating for us, discovering who we are, what we want, and kind of being able to separate ourselves from the message and the narrative that society is offering us instead, whether it's with food, eating better, changing your diet, or changing the way you interact with technology or pursuing a goal, it requires a certain amount of deviance. You've got to be able to, at first when I started changing my diet and being more careful with what I eat, it was a little bit challenging to go to ask the waiter or waitress every time, hey, can I have a gluten-free bun with that, or a lettuce wrap, or can we, changing around the orders, or being at somebody's house and being like, sorry, that's just not on the menu for me. So it's a muscle that you need to work, this deviance muscle. And How do you recommend people start practicing that and growing that muscle and that attitude of deviance to be able to pursue what's truly the best for them instead of what the world offers us?
Yeah, I mean that's the $1,000,000 question, and I'll point directly to my dear friend and colleague Pilar Gerasimo. I think I can say this. She's writing a book called The Healthy Deviant. And that's something that she's worked on, a concept she's worked on developing for 20 plus years now, and has written extensively about it, and I was very fortunate to just get a copy of the manuscript last week. So that'll be out, I believe, December or January, so it's coming up soon. But drawing heavily on her perspective, that concept of healthy deviance, not just of rebellious deviance, of counterculturalism, but the concept of like thoughtful deviance. What matters to me, and the recognition that conformity never ever produces, conformity to the current messed up norms, doesn't produce outcomes that anybody wants. And if you agree with that statement, then we can get to a place where, like, okay, if I want something better than not good, I have to do something different. And so then recognizing that all of those norms, all of those conventions work well for, economic growth, they work well for social compliance and keeping law and order, so to speak, but they don't really work well to make individual people deeply happy. So there has to be this sort of the willingness to question, like, oh man, maybe we're not actually on the right track here as a culture overall. And then say, okay, if we think that's true, what do I as an individual, which is all I can control, what do I as an individual do differently? And it's not an easy process because you very quickly find yourself misunderstood, alone, confused about yourself, about your own identity, about your own values and goals, judged by other people, as you've probably experienced with some of this stuff. And the great thing about something like food is that the social norms are slowly shifting. So it's not so weird now to go into a restaurant and ask for a gluten-free option as it was 10 or 20 years ago. And so in that sense, some of the social norms are making it easier for us to make healthy choices. But in a lot of other ways, a friend of mine said to me recently, talking about dating, and she was like, "I need to find somebody who's not on Instagram." And I was like, "What? Why?" And then I was like, "Oh yeah, yes, I got it." But that willingness to say, "Okay, this is a thing that many people do," but the thoughtfulness it requires and the sort of intestinal fortitude to do a different thing is a certain statement, or is a certain corollary of strength of character and clarity about values. And I think I always come up with this. I'm a scientist, so I always think about from a biological standpoint. If you remember back to your high school biology class where you watched the video of cells, one cell dividing and kind of pulling apart and becoming this like figure 8 shape, and then there's two different cells there. And I have this recurring vision of society being a lot like that, where we have an unbalanced division, a mitotic division there of people who are staying the course, being pretty unconscious, being pretty conventional, and they will plummet to their own oblivion if my prediction is correct. And then there is a subset. There's a different group that has to painfully pull apart and extract themselves from that convention and free themselves to do a different thing. And that's a painful, odd, excruciating, confusing, disorienting, exhausting process. So how to do that in short, I don't have a short answer on that. A lot of it has to do with recognizing that you may or may not be on the right track right now. And then you're free to say, I want it to be different,
I think I have a short one, or an easy practice. I learned this from Tim Ferriss, but he says, buy a weird pair of pants. Not so weird that people like just know you're being crazy, but just like a little bit weird, so people are like Are you sure you wanted to
I
wear
have a
those
pair
pants?
of those pants, actually.
Yeah.
They're burgundy corduroy.
There you go.
They're just, maybe
They're
they
just
might not
bad,
quite.
yeah. You just want them to be
Yeah,
just
people are
bad
like,
enough that people are like, did you really?
Did you do that on purpose?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And just being able to do that and be in situations
Right.
where you've got to be a little bit professional or
Right.
show up, you just kind of work that muscle and practice being a little bit deviant.
Right.
But it's surprising that that's the same thing that everything else requires that we've been talking about.
I like that. I think that's a good one. I my girlfriend will not be seen in public with me wearing a denim shirt with denim pants. She won't be seen in public.
I don't understand.
I don't understand. Canadian tuxedos are classy, but apparently not everyone agrees with me. But that's one of those things. That's my version of the weird pair of pants.
Oh, that's great.
But yeah, I think it's a good starting point.
Yeah. Dallas, we've covered a tremendous amount on how we can live better, how we can live more consciously, and how we can live a life that really serves us and not set up to serve a narrative that's not in our interest. Do you have any closing thoughts to share, and then we'll open it up for a few questions?
Closing thoughts. I think one of the things that I'm kicking around a lot these days is this recognition that I've spent so much time in my life conforming to parents' standards, teachers' standards, bosses' standards, friends, colleagues, society at large's standards that I haven't really figured out who the Dallas is way at the bottom, the one that I probably left behind when I was 5. And I think that's an experience that in talking to friends, I think a lot of us have, and may not really even recognize that that's the thing. So I would encourage, and this is me giving myself advice, I would encourage further exploration of that, because ultimately we go way off track a lot without recognizing that we're off track, and then things don't feel good and we don't know why. And so I'm like, okay, let's strip it down, let's go back to basics and figure out, who am I all the way at the bottom when I'm by myself, when no one can see what I'm doing and no one knows my thoughts, no one knows what I want to do. Who is that person and what does that person care about? And that can be both unsettling to look at and also really healing. And that's the journey that I'm on, and the journey that I would encourage everyone to kind of undertake for themselves.
Well, Dallas, I can't wait to meet the Dallas that you're working on and you're bringing forward. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
There any questions?
I think the question, if I'm getting it right, is if I don't set very specific, very tangible, quantifiable goals, what do I do in place of that? Is that about right? Yeah. For me, it's so much more about process, so much more about moving through the experience of life and recognizing that I can set professional goals, I can set personal growth goals that are more likely to be achieved if I write them down and I do all the goal setting stuff that works really well. But that doesn't necessarily get me to the place I want to go. So a lot of it for me has become identifying areas of my life that don't feel good and just putting attention on those. And that could be relationships, that could be the way I spend my time, it could be my health, it could be any number of things. And just identifying where do I feel friction, where do I feel a lot of resistance, where do I feel discomfort or pain or just a lot of sort of suffering, and then letting that naturally kind of flow me into that space and to put more attention on that, because that changes over time. You know, as we iterate ourselves, what we put attention on evolves over time, and I don't have a sequence or a thing there. It's for me, for better or worse, it's a very organic, malleable, free-flowing process. But it starts with identifying what doesn't feel good, i.e., what do I want to be different? And once I know what I want to be different, then I can start inquiring, how do I achieve that? And often, going all the way back to your kind of point about the Whole30, sometimes it's experimentation. It is this thing with my health or with my food doesn't feel quite right. Something's not right there. And I sometimes don't know what the end point or what the long-term behavior is or the pattern or the habit that it needs to be to make it feel really good. But I do know that that's the place I need to start exploring. And I think this, again, Occam's razor, simple solutions. If you have a gut sense that you're not putting enough attention on your physical health, start putting some more attention on that. And the things that we put the most effort into excusing and justifying and avoiding looking at are usually the things that are our biggest stumbling block. So when I suggest to people, oh, I see, that your diet's really pretty good, but I also notice that you're drinking most nights of the week, maybe, giving that a break for a while might, prompt some kind of progress. And they're like, no, it's totally fine. And they get this very defensive posture. The more defensive you are, the more important it is to you on some profound level. And if you find yourself getting really good at justifying things or emotionally responsive and sort of reactive and defensive, that's a dead giveaway that's a thing you need to look at. So it's kind of the litmus test of how much do you hate me for saying this? That's the thing.
Ah, I like that a lot.
So the question then is, how do I know if I feel good? Is that right?
Yeah.
If you don't feel good, you know. If you do feel good, you probably know. And so I don't know that it's actually useful to try to quantitatively define, do I feel good to myself relative to somebody else, relative to some objective external standard. If you are perfectly content in your life, I don't want to change anything. If everything feels good, I don't want to change anything. If you tell me everything feels good, but you say to yourself, well, not really, all that really is happening there is sort of self-delusion. And that's not my business to meddle with. But if something doesn't feel good to you, you'll probably know, because you'll probably notice a yearning for it to be different, some piece of it, right? And we have these deep, profound yearnings of I wish this thing in my life was different, or I hope that in 10 years it'll be that way instead of the way it is now. And so the recognition that we want it to be different than it is, there's the litmus test. And that's different for every single person. And and this is actually one of the aspects of the Whole30 that I still really stand by in every other sort of self-experiment, is I don't need to, or don't want to, it actually works against the process of self-exploration, self-development for some external expert, guru, whoever, to say, this is what you should eat and how much at what times of day for this outcome. I don't know any of that for you, and neither does anybody else, and the ones that say they do are lying, usually to themselves, because they think they do. But if it feels good for you, you know, and if it doesn't feel good for you, you're the only one that's going to know whether it feels better or worse when you start changing things. And so start changing things, and start at the place that feels the least good. And what often happens, and this is, again, what happened a lot when people started changing their diet with the Whole30 program, if that was an area where they're like, I really need to put attention on my health, on nutrition, and they started changing that, lots of times relationships, creativity, sleep, and many other things in life that were lesser issues but still didn't feel good started to self-resolve, because these things are all interrelated. So what you might find is if you start with the most obvious place that doesn't feel good, some of the other things may just start to feel better, and you might not even notice that until weeks or months or years later, where you're like, oh yeah, I used to get that really bad seasonal allergy thing, or I used to have seasonal depression in the wintertime, and I kind of don't have that anymore, and you don't even notice because it just never reappeared. So long-winded way of saying, you are the only person who knows whether it feels good for you or not. I can't tell you that.
Thanks for listening to the Story Engine podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes and resources mentioned in this episode and every episode at thestoryengine.co. If you want to tell better stories and grow your business with content marketing and copywriting, be sure to download the Content Strategy Template at contentstrategytemplate.com. This template is an essential part of any business that wants to boost their traffic, leads, and sales with content marketing. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.